My name's Comena Dorling. I'm Head of Policy and Programmes at Coram Children's Legal Centre, and I've run the Migrant Children's Project at CCLC for the last 8 years. And I was asked to come and talk to you about the training that Coram Children's Legal Centre delivers to voluntary agencies and others on the law. And then I thought that it would probably be just as useful to hear from someone who works for one of those organisations and actually acts on the knowledge and the training that they've received. So I'm being joined by Kalyani McCarthy, who is the Service Manager for Refugee and Migrants at the Children's Society. So I'm going to talk a bit about what Coram Children's Legal Centre does, and then I'll hand over to her to talk a bit about how that works in practice. So just to give you an overview of who we are and what we do, Coram Children's Legal Centre is part of a bigger group of Coram group of charities, and our main aim and purpose is to promote and protect the rights of children in the UK and around the world. And we do that through direct legal services. So we have a legal practice unit with contracts in immigration, education and community care law. We run the Child Law Advice Service, which is an advice line, and we have lots of information available online on all things child law related. We have an international department that does consultancy work on law and policy reform around the world. And the bit that I run is the Migrant Children's Project, which is a kind of smaller version, if you like, of CCLC in terms of its purpose and how it implements that. So the Migrant Children's Project has been going for just over 10 years. It's grown in size over that time, but its purpose has remained the same, and that's to promote and protect specifically the rights of young refugees and migrants in the UK. We work on 3 different levels to try and fulfil our aims and to help this group. The first level is what we call sort of individual change. So we provide legal advice and representation directly to children, young people and families who are subject to immigration control. We take on some of those cases pro bono. As you all know, there is no legal aid for immigration cases. So that's one of the areas that in recent years we've had to kind of develop our service to try and address that need. Obviously, it's quite limited what we can do. We will take on a few cases pro bono, but most of our advice delivery is through a phone line, which is open 3 days a week and is open to anyone and is entirely free, and also outreach advice that we run in Greater London, where we work with other community organisations or children's centres or youth projects, anyone who is already working with this group and has built up trust, and we will then use them, if you like, as a jumping board to go in and deliver legal advice on their immigration circumstances, but also anything else that might arise. So quite often there are issues to do with housing, destitution, access to healthcare, that kind of thing. So as well as the individual change, one of the core aims of the project is to try and change practice. So to change how this group of children is supported. And that we do through training, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail, and the provision of legal information and guidance, which we have online and in hard copies. And our audience for all of those things is both voluntary agencies, but also those working in local authorities, such as social workers or foster carers, really any frontline practitioners working with this group. The third strand is the more systemic change. So we're trying to change law and policy, which is a hard job, especially in this current climate. But the idea being that we're doing all this frontline work, we're getting all this evidence, we're seeing all the problems that this group of children are facing. How can we change the system as a whole to benefit the wider group? So we do policy advocacy and also strategic litigation to try and change the system more broadly. The project, we have 7 members of staff in the project. 5 of them are solicitors, I'm one of the non-solicitors, but we're very much rooted in legal expertise, but thinking about how we use our legal knowledge to help the system more generally. So the project was always envisaged as a bridge between law and policy affecting young refugees and migrants, and anyone that works in the immigration sector will know that that's incredibly complicated and changes all the time, and frontline practitioners who are non-legal professionals and can't really be expected to have the time and ability necessarily to keep on top of all those legal changes. And so that's why the project is here. We kind of translate the changes and the situation in terms of law and policy so that those who are working on the front line can use that to best support the children that they work with. A key part of that, of course, is making it understandable. And it sounds really obvious, but it's not actually, it's not necessarily a skill that comes naturally to all legal professionals. When I can say this working for Coram Children's Legal Centre with solicitors, I think sometimes there's a tendency to want to kind of keep the law to legal experts, and there's a sort of wariness about how much you share. But I think in the times that we face at the moment and the reduced capacity and the changes to legal aid, it's all the more important that those who are working in the law do as much as they can to empower others who are not necessarily legally trained and qualified to use the law in their day-to-day work. Just to give you an example, which came to mind earlier, of the kind of changes where our work is needed. If any of you have been following the immigration bill, there are significant changes that are going to affect young people, young migrants who have been in the care system. And it's likely that they will go through. This is a clear example where, I mean, I've been following this day in, day out since the autumn, and I'm still not entirely on top of it. It's become fiendishly complicated because it's areas to do with community care and the Children Act, but in the immigration bill, and it's going to be one of those areas that we'll need to translate for those working directly with this group when the bill passes. The kinds of problems that the group of children and young people we're trying to help face are wide-ranging. Anyone that's worked in this area will know them well. Obviously, lots of these young people have gone through incredibly difficult times before they'll even come to the UK, and then when they get here, they'll be faced by very confusing asylum immigration process, potential disputes over how old they are if they haven't got documentation to prove how old they are, difficulties in terms of any mental health problems they might have already had or have developed, and accessing the appropriate care once they're in the UK, difficulties in general when it comes to accessing mainstream services such as GPs or education, and receiving the right type of accommodation and support from a local authority, and the broader context of any kind of isolation and discrimination they might feel. All of these issues, underneath them, have there is a legal perspective to all of them in terms of what they are entitled to, how they should be treated by agencies in the UK once they're here. Of course, it's not enough for the young person themselves or for someone working with them just to know what the law is. You have to know how that's implemented in practice, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about when Kalyani joins me in a second. The challenges in ensuring that this group receive the protection and the support that they need are quite widespread. But one of the key reasons why the Migrant Children's Project exists and why we do any of the training and awareness raising that we do is that there is a long-standing perception that immigration control trumps everything else. It's certainly the message that you hear quite a lot from this current government, but actually it's probably the message I've heard ever since I started working in this area. And we're trying to constantly challenge that and constantly remind people that children's rights, children are children first and foremost for a start, and that immigration control doesn't automatically override what they're entitled to once they're in the UK. And linked to that perception is general confusion about what these young people are entitled to. And that's another thing that we're trying to address all the time in our advice and information. It's clarifying the kind of support they should be receiving and how people can help them. It's a very, very vulnerable client group, so we will often advise and work with children and young people directly, but a lot of the time it's actually more appropriate for us to help the practitioners that are working with that group. As I mentioned, there's a lack of legal aid in general for immigration cases, and that's made the job harder in recent years and has created more of a gap that we need to fill in terms of how, if there's no legal aid at all for immigration, yes, you can develop a pro bono service, and we have, and lots of other organisations have. That's never going to address the huge gap that we're facing for this group. So what we've also been trying to think about is how can we work with other organisations to improve their knowledge and improve their ability to support young people with immigration issues. Obviously, you have to stay within the realms of regulation and what advice can and can't be given, but there's quite a lot of work, and again, we'll touch upon it in a minute, that voluntary agencies can do to support young people and help them with gathering evidence if they're making an application and things like that. And so we're trying to think, how can we have a solicitor or another legal representative, and we use them in the most efficient way possible. So we use them with other volunteers or practitioners from other organisations. One of the things that's really important to the training that we deliver as our model is that it's always backed up by online information, which mainly in the form of kind of fact sheets and briefing, and also our advice line, because we're quite often covering a whole range of really complicated legal issues, and people need to feel able to come back with questions afterwards. So one of our strengths is that we can say, okay, we've bombarded you with information now. If you go away and you have any questions afterwards, come back to us. We've got an advice line, we've got information, and we can help support you further. So just to give you a flavour of the kind of training we deliver, we have a range of courses. Our most popular course is a day-long course. It's called The Rights and Entitlements of Young Refugees and Migrants. It goes through pretty much everything that group would cover. We also have courses on supporting child victims of trafficking, working with undocumented young people, registering children as British citizens, and working with families with no recourse to public funds. All of those are delivered at quorum. Some are free, some we have a very low cost charge for. The project in general is grant funded, which allows us to do that. Our main aim is to reach as many people as possible rather than make a profit, so we can kind of pitch it at a very affordable rate. We also deliver in-house training on request when people come to us, but quite often that's local authorities, but it might also be organisations. Last year we trained about just over 800 individuals from a range of different organisations that you've listed there. And I think it's important to note that the demand for our training has probably quadrupled in the past 5 years or so. Our capacity hasn't changed that much, but the demand is definitely increasing, and even more so this year, which I think probably reflects the climate that we're in. Another thing to note is a number of courses that we run with voluntary agencies. So we're trying to train people who are working in that sector, but also it's really useful to train alongside them, because as I mentioned before, it's not just about what is this child entitled to in the law. It's like, actually, how does that work in practice? And quite often it can be a bit meaningless to say, well, they should have received X, Y, Z, if that in practice, a local authority is going to resist that for a variety of reasons. So you have to think through, what are the next steps then? And it's not just about okay, well, we'll refer it all to a solicitor, because there aren't enough solicitors to constantly be judicially reviewing every case. You need to think, how can those practitioners who might not be lawyers advocate for and with that young person so that they get the support that they need? And that's a really kind of fundamental part of what we do. We're talking about what their rights are, and then we're talking about the realities of the system and how you can kind of practically help. In terms of the legal framework, Coram Children's Legal Centre has always been about promoting the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and so that underpins everything that we do and everything that we talk about, specifically talking about the need for the best interests of the child to be a primary consideration, for their voice to be heard, and in the context of immigration, it's really important, obviously, to be talking about the European Convention on Human Rights, specifically Article 8, the right to respect for your private and family life, which again underpins so much of what we do with this group. So that's the kind of international aspect to what we would talk about in training. And then, of course, we would always go through the domestic legal framework and what this group is entitled to under the Children Act, under the Human Rights Act, which is, of course, is linked to the European Convention, and in the myriad immigration related acts and all the policy that is linked to that. So just a final point before I hand over to Kalyani is that as I mentioned before, one of the things that we struggle with is there's a lack of legal aid for immigration cases, and there's sort of limited pro bono work. And so what we're thinking very much is how we empower other organisations to help with immigration cases. It's probably worth flagging that while there are other areas of law that we work in, such as community care, which are covered by legal aid, these are probably going to be under risk if we continue down the road towards the residence test. We can put all our faith in the Supreme Court, but we don't know what's going to happen there. And so it will become even more important, I think, that children, young people and families know what they're entitled to, know what their rights are, but also that those who work with them know this as well, so that they can advocate on their behalf, because we certainly won't be able to rely on there being the legal representation there to enforce those rights if we absolutely need to. I hope there will be, but it's just in terms of where we're headed, it's worth being mindful of that. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Kalyani to talk through a bit of that work. I'll probably pop up again at the end.
Hi, so as Kamena said, my name's Kalyani, and I'm the service manager at the Children's Society in London for our refugee and migrant projects. We're a large national children's charity that hopefully some of you have heard of, and we've got lots of different projects, but in London at the moment, the ones that work with refugees and asylum seeking young people and families are 5. We've got 9 practitioners who are working within these projects. And they're all very specialist and have a very good level of understanding in relation to the needs of these children and families. So just to provide a bit of an overview of the model of the services that we offer, the main focus of all the projects is holistic one-to-one casework and advocacy. Underpinning all of our work is the difficulty of children and young people trying to access services that are affected by their immigration status. So the primary focus of the work is trying to first work out what are their rights and entitlements based on their individual situations, trying to explain this to them in the most simple way, and then trying to help them to actually access those services that are being blocked. As you can all imagine, that the main thing is generally trying to resolve their immigration status, or if they already have some form of status, it might be that there's barriers related to that. One of the projects that I mentioned, the Family Voice one, there's a lot of families who might have been given limited leave to remain, but then they've got a no recourse to public funds condition attached to that, And so one of the main roles of that project is trying to get that lifted so that they can access other services. In relation to that, obviously immigration does underpin so many different areas of children and families' lives. So things like, for example, accessing healthcare. As Ximena mentioned, in the kind of legal and policy frameworks, there are entitlements available to people, but it's about, in practice, can they access it? And so the model of our work is that we work with a relatively small number of people with, in terms of casework and advocacy, but it enables us to actually go with the family or the young person and support them in advocating to access those rights. Similarly, things like access to education, gathering evidence for immigration applications, and all the kind of intensive work enables us to do that in quite a long-term way. Kind of sitting alongside the casework and the advocacy service, we do a lot of awareness raising and training to professionals. Often this involves things like just a broad kind of overview of the immigration and asylum processes to practitioners that sometimes don't have any existing knowledge of it. Just yesterday, for example, we had a training at our office which was for staff from children's centres. And it just provided them with some kind of basic level of understanding of different immigration statuses, the kind of situations that families might be in, and what they are and aren't entitled to, and where they can go to for support. I think similarly to what Ximena was saying, it's often not saying, these are all the answers, and actually, even if you did give kind of all the existing current rights and entitlements, they change so often that we're not expecting professionals to understand it fully. It's more just recognising that it is an issue, and that's something that we see so often, is that professionals just don't see immigration as a problem, and it's about kind of putting it on the agenda and saying, right, this is something that really has to be looked into. Whilst we do training professionals, we also do sessions to young people themselves, so to try and reach a wider number of young people than the ones that we are able to reach through the kind of lower level casework support. So we've gone to quite a lot of colleges, to ESOL classes, we've gone to youth groups, kind of refugee and migrant specific ones, but also more general youth organisations to try and explain to children and young people what their entitlements are and what they can access. We also deliver social activities and more kind of focused skills building sessions. Just to give an example of that, so on the Family Voice project, we were getting inundated with requests for support with trying to apply to have this no recourse to public funds condition lifted, and we just weren't able to kind of meet that demand. So the practitioners delivered a couple of sessions to families directly, explaining to them, this is the application, this is the kind of evidence you might want, this is how you can go about making the application. So to try and reach a wider number of people than we're able to through the casework. Something that we've recently started doing more of within our destitution project is a befriending service, because what we've recognised is that there's often ongoing support needs that, whilst we've kind of got to a stage where we've done as much as we can in terms of practical things for casework and rights and entitlements, children, particularly unaccompanied children and young people, still need an ongoing service, and particularly with things like navigating London and just having that regular person that they can meet with. So we do a befriending service, and we're just about to set up a fortnightly group for young people who are destitute, to provide a kind of space where they can meet and hopefully kind of improve well-being and mental health. So just a few examples of how practitioners within the Refugee and Migrant Service use the law within this ongoing casework and advocacy. All the practitioners are registered at OISC level 1. In practice, most of the children and families that we work with require legal support much beyond that level. But what it does do is enable them to have quite a good level of understanding of what the possible options might be, and kind of identifying, is it that they might have a right under EEA law? Is it that they might have kind of protection concerns and they need to explore making an asylum claim? Is it that they might have acquired rights under Article 8? So it gives them that opportunity to first identify what support they might need and then take steps to try and access more kind of ongoing legal representation. However, practitioners, through attending the quorum training, and we always send any new members of staff onto that rights and entitlements training just to give them an update and to make sure that they've got quite a good overview. They're able to kind of utilise that knowledge and then use the resources that are available on the website, and sometimes with the advice line to kind of clarify what they think might be the appropriate course of action. So something that comes up routinely is trying to secure children in need assessments with local authorities, and also challenging a failure to provide that support or kind of inadequate support. So I'm going to speak a little bit later on just about a case that was in relation to support provided to families under Section 17, and there just wasn't a high enough level of support being provided, so we were able to successfully challenge that. Similarly, with age disputes and age assessments, we're regularly asked to act as the appropriate adult. I think sometimes local authorities don't realise, what we're actually going to do, and sometimes hold them to account for, doing it incorrectly. But we're often asked to represent and act as the appropriate adult for children and young people. We often get requests. For example, it's not just about the delivering that service. It's also about advocating and saying, should this age assessment be happening at all? So it can be kind of at multiple levels. Advocating and challenging human rights assessment. So it's possible this might change under the new proposals, but this is something that comes up regularly, and we find that local authorities often misinterpret the impact of Schedule 3 and how it should be applied, particularly for care leavers. So it's kind of supporting the young person in explaining what the correct process should be, and then advocating with them to the local authority to ensure that human rights assessments are being completed and that they're being completed in a correct way. This is probably one of the most common and I think probably most important parts of our work, is supporting children, young people and families through the immigration and asylum process. So that's invariably not giving the advice directly to them, but supporting them to try and access a generally pro bono immigration representative, and then ensuring that they're fully supported through the process. So sometimes simply by just accompanying a young person to an appointment, being there as a form of support, and then having kind of a debrief afterwards to make sure that they understand in kind of the simplest possible way what the process is and what to expect from it. And we find that's absolutely invaluable. Similarly, part of that process is assisting with gathering the supporting evidence for immigration and asylum applications, which is extremely time consuming, and particularly when it's a solicitor that has kind of agreed to offer the service pro bono. Us being able to take that time and request medical records, school records, gather supporting letters from friends and family is really, really a crucial part of the work that we do. Also writing witness statements, so we're regularly asked to provide witness statements because we're involved in so many different areas of the children and young people's lives. It's very helpful to be able to provide an overview of kind of all the different aspects, and say, for example, they're not in education, we can explain the background as to why that is, and it might be that they wanted to be in education, but they've just had these practical barriers that have prevented them from being able to access it. We regularly attend appeal hearings and act as witnesses as well. I think I've mentioned this already, but challenging Home Office refusals to lift the no recourse to public funds conditions or to accept fee waivers. So as I'm sure everyone is aware, the kind of multiple layers and barriers that they're adding, even when someone has a very clear route to resolving their situation, is this no recourse to public funds condition, trying to gather evidence to apply for a destitution fee waiver, having to have a valid passport when you're submitting an Article 8 application. So these are all things that we try and help with and try and find creative ways of addressing. Just to give an example, so we had a young person who had been able to access a pro bono solicitor. He was actually subject to a deportation order, and he had an appeal hearing. And although it was brilliant, and the solicitor was fantastic, and she had provided the services completely for free, she then had to instruct a barrister, and we were able to approach a Muslim charity that agreed to fund the full cost of his barrister's fees. So it's things like that that just we're able to take the time and to think creatively about how do we fill this gap with the absence of legal aid. So this is just to bring to life one case study of a young person that we were working with and the kinds of knowledge that the practitioner was able to utilise and didn't have to resort to actually finding a legal representative to assist. It's not always the case. We do sometimes have to resort to legal advocacy, but this was a very good example of a success story. So it was a young Afghan male who was 21 at the time. He was appeal rights exhausted and he was destitute. He was just staying with friends. His support from social services had been stopped and he was currently not in education, but he did want to be. He just had practical issues trying to enrol at college. So the practitioner that was supporting him had attended the quorum training and they had utilised the fact sheets that were available online, which explained about care leaver entitlements. So they were able to use the following law and policy to advocate for this young person. So firstly, they assisted them to re-access further education. They were able to use the Skills Funding Agency rules and accompany the young person to the college. It was a bit of a catch-22 in this situation because in order to be exempt from having to pay tuition fees, the young person had to evidence that they were a care leaver. And in order to re-access support from social services, they needed to show that they were in education. So it was a bit tricky. In the end, we actually were able to find a grant to pay for the young person to cover his tuition fees. And then because he was back in education, we were able to advocate to the local authority for them to complete a human rights assessment. In terms of his immigration, we were able to accompany him to appointments with his solicitor, make sure he understood the process, assisted in gathering evidence to submit with it, and he ended up submitting further submissions to the Home Office, which are currently being considered. The local authority did agree to complete a human rights assessment. It was quite a drawn-out process. It took quite a few months before they came to a conclusion. And whilst they agreed that they were going to accommodate him, they said it was only temporary, and they had concluded that he should be referred to asylum support. The practitioner was able to point out to them, based on the knowledge that they'd gained from the quorum training, that actually this wasn't correct, and based on the Barking and Dagenham ruling, that they should provide that support to him as a care leaver who was in education. At one point it looked like we would maybe have to resort to legal advocacy, but they did agree to go back to their legal department to check this, and then they came back and said, yeah, we will support him, and that's, we'd misinterpreted it. So this was just a good example of how the practitioner was able to really use that that knowledge to support the young person, make sure they fully understood their rights, and not having to try and find a solicitor for support with it.
And also a good example of a case that in a couple of months the approach will probably be entirely different, because pretty much all of that will change under the immigration bill into something much more complicated that everyone will have to get their heads around. So a really good outcome, but again, you can't stop once you've got that knowledge. It's got to kind of keep refreshing it.
This is another case study, and this is an example of more kind of strategic outcomes. So the practitioners that worked on the Family Voice project, they noticed, although they work pan-London and work with many different local authorities, they noticed that there was a systematic issue of one particular local authority, which you can see here, of providing very, very low rates of financial support to families that were being supported under Section 17. So the rates were so low that families were struggling to kind of meet their basic needs, things like food, clothes, household items, and in one case, a single mother of 4 was being provided with only £50 per week. As a result of the practitioners kind of recognising this in several cases with this local authority, they contacted both our policy team within the Children's Society and Quorum, and they were able to gather evidence of these real examples of families and the kind of differing support they were getting in order to take a case, which was successful, and the local authority, as a result, changed their policy about subsistence rates. And they also backdated payments for families that had been receiving the low rates previously. This case is now being used by our practitioners and hopefully by others to challenge other local authorities in how they're providing support rates, because there isn't any consistency.
So that's a kind of very quick whiz through training that we deliver, and also examples of how practitioners can kind of put their legal knowledge into action. We sort of wanted to end with kind of thoughts of other ways that other individuals can be kind of empowered to use the law to promote and protect their own rights, if you like, and kind of ways in which we will probably go in terms of the services we deliver, but also it would be interesting to hear from others what work they do and where they might take that. So one of the issues that I think both the Children's Society and Quorum Children's Legal Centre are working on is empowering young people themselves on what their legal rights are. And we're starting to deliver more workshops on legal rights. The key part of this, I think, is that it incorporates some level of service provision, so that you are connected, either that it's being delivered by a legal professional or that there's a connection to some sort of legal support. Because as I said before, it's all very well saying that's what you're entitled to, or this is what you could do within the immigration context, but then expecting a young person to necessarily do that by themselves isn't reasonable, and so they would need further sort of support and help with that. So workshops on legal rights supported by legal professionals that involve service provision, so that they can seek further advice on their case if need be after that workshop. And generally, we're trying to work towards providing more guidance and information that's targeted at young people and at individuals. Ideally, we wouldn't, when we're thinking about the immigration context, it's something that's always made us very nervous, because it's such a complicated area of law, and we don't want to be saying to people, hey, yeah, just go off and make applications by yourself. But we're trying to be realistic and acknowledging that there isn't the provision there for everyone to have access to a legal representative, and in certain contexts they're going to have to try and do more things for themselves, and how can we help them do that. Another area is awareness raising in the voluntary and statutory sectors. Do you want to talk about your IROs?
Yeah, so as part of one of the projects which was focusing on undocumented children and young people, something that we were seeing a lot of was that local authorities weren't recognising the lack of immigration status for looked after children, and it wasn't kind of consistently being discussed within looked after child review meetings. And then it was once they were getting a bit older when the kind of impact of immigration status on their rights and entitlements was most severe, that it was becoming apparent, and then it was much harder, much more complicated, and much more impactful on their lives, like the delay of trying to resolve it. So with Quorum, myself and Anita, who was the legal and policy officer, we did quite a lot of training to independent reviewing officers particularly, because we wanted them to ensure that it was being discussed within LAC review meetings. And we also went out to social work teams as well to just highlight the importance of immigration status and the importance of resolving it. And we've also produced a film in partnership with Quorum and a couple of the young people that we worked with, which we presented at the National Independent Reviewing Officer Conference last year. And we're trying to use it now as a tool just to kind of bring immigration status to the attention of professionals, and not give them the kind of answers of how to resolve it, but just to make sure that it's an issue that is being looked into.
We've got the film to show, but before that, just quickly to talk about the policy side as well. I think all of these things are so heavily intertwined in terms of what people are seeing on the ground and what we're trying to change in terms of the law and policy. And so another way that we're trying to kind of use the law, if you like, is by working together to lobby or to talk to civil servants and to try and kind of improve the system as a whole. Quorum and the Children's Society co-chair the Refugee Children's Consortium, which is a group of over 40 organisations working on issues facing refugee children. We're also part of a group called the Access to Higher Education Working Group that looks specifically on young migrants' access to university. And it's just a really good way of taking all of this one step further. So yes, we're trying to kind of advocate for individuals, but also we're trying to kind of make the situation better as a whole. Just mindful of time, before perhaps we put the film on, does anyone have any questions or any thoughts about their own work and what they're doing that might be useful to share?
I'm from the personal support unit, and we help people represent themselves in court. Since LASPO, we've seen a huge increase in family work and very little in immigration. And I'm just wondering if that's because they're scooped up by other organisations, or if they do get as far as court, they've got someone with them. But I'm curious as to why we haven't seen.
Why you're not seeing more? I mean, certainly our experience from the outreach legal advice that we're doing in Greater London, and we're specifically trying to target difficult to reach groups, if you like, is that without our being proactive, a lot of this group just don't address. They don't do anything about their immigration issues, and they don't necessarily know who to turn to or who to trust. And so that's a good way in for us. But the amount of work is included home visits. We'll find them a lawyer and then have to accompany them to the lawyer. I wonder how many people just are underground and not doing anything about it at all now. And the frustrating thing is we can't count that. We don't know because they're not coming to the fore. So I don't think that the problem isn't there. I think that maybe they're just not accessing anything at this stage. But that's a bit of a guess.
You talked about using pro bono lawyers from time to time. I was wondering how strategic that is, or is it just you get a case where you need one and you call up your friends who are lawyers and say, has anyone got the time to do this pro bono? Or do you have more of a sort of a bus policy? Also, public legal education is recently getting more of a hearing than it's ever had before. I think for the reasons that you said, people are nervous about it, but equally when there isn't the legal provision, you have to do something. Do you use volunteer lawyers in that capacity at the moment?
I'll talk about our pro bono approach, and then maybe Carrie-Anne can talk about how they struggle with it. So we have very limited pro bono capacity. We can take on a few immigration cases, and we also have a project that helps people with citizenship applications. But for the immigration side, our strategy is pretty much phone everyone you know and see if you can get someone to do it. And if not, we're trying to save our own capacity for the most complex, unappealing cases where we're like, no one's going to want to touch this with a barge pole, but we'll try and take that on. What we are doing more now in light of recent case law is exceptional cases funding applications, because we're starting to see that they're successful. And that seems to be a good use of our lawyers' time. is to do that work and then pass it on to someone else who's like more than happy to take it on. But it's a really tricky one because we don't want to be in a position where we're giving advice and then going, that's the end of the road for you. So a lot of our work when it comes to outreach and the funded side is referrals. Like so much energy is going on to finding other people that take on that case. There was another part to it about volunteer lawyers. I think that's something that we need to think about more of, to be honest. And again, it's about the balance between how you can use volunteers and how much time it takes. Our citizenship we've got a children's pro bono legal service, is in partnership with law firms, so Allen & Overy and DLA Piper, and it's using lawyers from those firms to help with those applications. It's the beginning of thinking about that, but I think we need to do more. Do you want to say about how you...
Yeah, I mean, ours is very similar. Unfortunately, there's not really any strategy in how we find pro bono solicitors. It's, you know, the demand for it just completely outstrips the supply, and we have built, you know, we've built quite a good level of knowledge about any services there are across London that do offer pro bono support. And yeah, one of the practitioners from the project is here, and you know, she speaks to one pro bono solicitor on a daily basis because he's working with half of her clients. And it, you know, it's a constant challenge, and it is something that we're trying to look into. We've actually had a couple of cases of successful exceptional case funding applications in the past couple of weeks that we've never had before, so that's promising. But it's also just thinking creatively about, you know, can we try and get a grant to cover some of the cost? Can we get, will there be a solicitor who can offer kind of the Article 8 aspect pro bono, but then they've got an asylum element as well? But it is, it's very, very difficult.
And quite a lot of it is that initial diagnosis side. We do a lot of selling cases to other lawyers because they might not feel that they have the time to necessarily look at it in the first instance. But as lawyers ourselves, we can look at a case and go, actually, yes, this one's got a merit, and then you can kind of, it sort of encourages people to take it on, I think, someone else having looked at it. Were there any other...
Can I just come back to the practical question?
Yeah.
What do you do about insurance for your non-lawyer advisors?
I mean, all of our advisors are lawyers.
There.
Yeah. So within the Migrant Children's Project,
Okay.
I'm this, apart from the project officer, I am the only non-solicitor. Everyone else is a solicitor. So we have our advice lines run by a solicitor, and our outreach is conducted by solicitors, and actually our legal and policy officer is also a solicitor. So it all comes under that. There was another.
Right, so my name's Ian Scott. I work as a discharge service. We're sort of funded by the CCG, and we're obviously in health, so we're based in Mental Health Hospital. And there's just so much going on, and it's just like, I'm a bit like you, the cases that's coming through. We've built up quite a lot of services for lawyers' advice. We've got a lot of second tier advice. And obviously with immigration, because of the restrictions here with debt, we're very careful of what we can actually say. So sometimes I know a lot of stuff, and then I can't actually say to the client that I've got to desperately try and get a drop-in appointment. It's very difficult. We've also been dealing with the lack of knowledge both in a lot of organisation professionals on welfare, immigration, housing, and actually even the Care Act is quite frightening. So we've been doing something called, we do sort of bite-size training, which is a bit, sounds pretty similar to what you guys are doing, but it's probably not, we don't do anything wrong, we just basically just give people at a lower level. So we just give them sort of, yeah, this is what's going on, and this is what you look out for, it's the referrals, and if you've got problems, here we can go. So it's not as probably as in-depth as quite a lot of the stuff that you're doing. We found that quite good, because what we find is we've got professionals asking the right questions.
Yeah, I think that's a huge, it's not expecting them, if you're a social worker, for example, your area of work is social care. It's not expecting them to become legal professionals, but as you say, it's knowing what questions to ask and what to look out for, and then who they might try and go to for further help.
And,
yeah.
I didn't know about you guys at all, so it's quite good. I will be sending you over.
I was going to say, if we've got about the Migrant Children's Project, there are leaflets up the front which talk about give links to our advice line and online information if anyone wants them. I'm aware it sounds like there are lunch things going on outside and I don't want to keep you. Perhaps we could just run the thing and then if people are interested they can stay. Well, we're going to play this film. Obviously, if you're starving, you are no obligation to stay in the room. But it might also be of interest to some of you. But thank you.
People come to the UK for many different reasons. I was brought here as a child and it wasn't my choice. I came when I was 13 and I was left with someone I didn't really know, and my dad left me with her and he went back to Sierra Leone.
I was 12 when I came to the UK and I was put into foster care shortly before my 13th birthday.
When I grew up as a young child, I always had an ambition of wanting to be someone, but at this stage, I lost all hope.
The project that I work on is called Supported Options, and it's supporting young people who don't have any immigration status. The impact of not having immigration status on a young person can affect almost every aspect of that young person's life. It can affect their access to secondary healthcare. It can almost certainly prevent their progression to university. It can affect their housing, their access to mainstream benefits, the right to work. It can affect their social services support once they turn 18, and that could be stopped potentially.
I found it really hard to look after myself, financially. I went to look for a job, applied for apprenticeships, and I couldn't work. I wasn't allowed to work because I didn't have any legal status.
When I met the Children's Society, actually, I was destitute. I didn't really have anywhere to live. I was just staying at a friend's house. It's really, really difficult for someone who is undocumented.
Above all else, it can affect their mental and emotional health and sense of identity if there's so much uncertainty about what their future is and whether they're allowed to stay permanently or not.
I just felt like my life wasn't worth living. I wanted to kill myself at times. I wanted to commit suicide because I didn't know, where my life was going.
When I first met Navdeep about a year and a half ago, he was in a very difficult and precarious situation. He'd been waiting over 2 years for a decision from the Home Office, and during that time he couldn't access any form of benefits, he couldn't progress to university, and his future was just extremely uncertain.
I felt really low. Seeing all my other friends working and going to universities, it just made me feel like, why can't I be just like them? Why can't I just have a normal life? Why do you think the issue of young people's immigration status isn't picked up sooner?
I think there are lots of different reasons, but one of them is that people just often find it very, very complicated. I mean, as you know, the immigration and asylum processes in the UK are very complex, and I think people do need to access specialist advice about it.
I'm visiting Anita Hurrell at the Coram Children's Legal Centre to find out what help is available.
If somebody's been in the UK since a very early age and they've lived here for a long time with no legal status, it's very important that steps are taken to actually resolve immigration status, and it may be that certain applications can be made before the child turns 18 that wouldn't be possible after they turn 18.
Where can professionals go to seek help for young people?
Here at Cornwall Children's Legal Centre we have an advice line and it can be, so children and young people can call our advice line themselves or email, but it's also open to professionals, so anybody can contact us and ask for initial advice about the situation and what somebody's legal rights might be. It's very important that social workers take steps to not provide advice themselves, but to try and ensure that children and young people access quality legal advice and get a solicitor if they need one.
I'm off to meet Solange Valdez at the Ealing Law Centre, who specialises in immigration law. And I'm here to see Solange. How come children born in the UK aren't already British?
As far as the assumption that because you're born in the UK and have a birth certificate, British birth certificate, that does not mean that a child or a person would be British. The law changed on the 1st of January 1983. Before then, yes, a child born in the UK would be British automatically, regardless of the parent status. If it has been established that a child is not already British, it is possible for a child, for instance, who was born in the UK, has completed his first 10 years in the UK, to register by entitlement, by right, as British citizens. That's one of the many scenarios that a child can register. Very often assumptions are made about children who are being looked after by the local authority that they're already British, and nothing is done to regularise or to register them as British. The impact is tremendous. Very often, the child turns 18 and then when he or she is trying to go to university, they get the shock of their lives, not having any rights, not having any status, and not being able to access education, student loans, for instance.
What advice would you have for professionals working in the care sector?
There's no legal aid anymore. That has made it very difficult for children to access legal advice, free legal advice. Now there are a number of organisations and projects like this one who give free legal advice, and we specialise on children and their rights and citizenship.
Aside from the direct casework that we offer to young people, we also do a lot of training at the moment. So we're going around to independent reviewing officers and social work teams across London just to raise awareness of some of the issues.
I think social workers usually think about immigration status in terms of the parent status. We had the training from the Children's Society, and that really highlighted the need to think about the child's immigration status as early as possible in terms of their future prospects. For any children where there's any suspicion that they might have issues, it doesn't hurt to ask.
I really hope from this awareness raising that more and more professionals will recognise the importance of immigration as being integral to a child or young person's future in the UK.
If you're working with young people, please check their immigration status early, as sorting this out sooner can make such a big impact on their lives.